Hi, my name is Dave Boardman. I'm a BIM tutor in Manchester, although at the moment I'm at home in West Yorkshire, locked down just the same as the rest of you. This is the flipped learning block, or part of the flipped learning block for the week on globalization. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run through an incredibly brief history of globalization. We're throwing in a few references here and there, but it may well challenge some of the things that you've been encouraged to think in the past, because we will look at power and power relationships in this module. And you will be aware that talking to people in different parts of the world is not necessarily an equal experience. So there we go. Let's share some images on the screen here. So this is a brief history of globalization. So we start with a two-dimensional representation of the world. But this in itself is a controversial one. This is the Peters projection. It is slightly different from the Mercator projection. And as you'll see, Africa is big and central on this projection, and Europe is a tiny little bit at the top. The USA doesn't look as big on this as it does on some other maps. Right? That in itself shows that the world can be portrayed in different ways. Right, okay, here we go. So, first signs of globalization came when early people left Africa. That is where Neanderthal and Homo sapien are believed to have originated. In Africa, after a while, people left Africa and started moving around the world. So that is the first efforts at globalization, at colonizing the world. It might have taken hundreds of thousands of years to get from Africa to South America, but there you go. There's no rush to do everything. I do this as a reminder to the racists out there that, as Peter Tosh said, we're all Africans. Okay, so what happened? People then settled into different cultures, communities. Their relationship with the land meant that they had different norms, different lifestyles. Some places, agriculture is fine. In other places, you can just gather your food or you can go out hunting it. Traditionally, it is believed that men went out hunting, women gathered things and looked after the children, did the cooking, etc., etc. This assumption is very much based upon modern ideas of gender and gender roles, but not necessarily backed up by evidence. Friedrich Engels, a mate of Karl Marx, wrote the Communist Manifesto together. In the 1840s, he started to discuss primitive communism. We were original communists, he said. You can check that out in his The Origin of Family, Private Property and the State. Not necessarily universally agreed perspective on early life, but not discredited either. Also, new research has indicated that half of the people who went hunting were women. So this division of labor between sort of males and females, about you go off and do the manly things and we'll stay at home and do the womanly things, the evidence doesn't back it up. There's a reference on there. Right. This is one of the interesting things that we will come towards the end of the module when we look at what is history, and we'll get the idea that history is what people today think about what happened in the past, including all sorts of inaccurate assumptions like the hunting, gathering, division of labor. So time passes, people have got out of Africa, they've got to China and various other places. Technology and transport develops. Transport via horse, via camel is possible. People start growing and making things and putting ingredients together in various ways. that, things that grow locally and then trade them around the world. So you've got some early trade routes here. Because you've got trade routes, it doesn't mean that somebody goes from Europe all the way to China to get some tea or whatever and then bring it all the way back. All along those routes, there are short journeys where tea, spices, various other things all moved, a few miles or a few hundred miles along those routes. And what happens then is we develop market towns and fairs. So people will go to the market, a bit like Jack and the Beanstalk, swapping his cow for, on the way to market for some magic beans. So, no, not all markets have magic beans, but it's the same sort of thing. People were doing this. I've been doing this for hundreds, thousands of years, where they would submit. We developed market towns and fairs, as they were called. Wherever you live, have a look around your local town, the ones nearby. If you've got a market hall, if you've got a market square, if you've got a horse fair, if you've got a corn exchange, whatever it is, these are examples of market gathering places for market and trade. So those places spread across, and the early towns and cities were developed in and around various parts of Asia. Travel distances increase as there's more efficient forms of transport, and trade develops, so you get what they call caravans, which is a whole pile of camels, for example, packed with things going up and down these trade routes. Marco Polo allegedly traveled from Italy to China along existing trade routes. That is not necessarily the case. There's a lot of controversy about whether other people did the traveling and he just talked to them while in Italy and wrote about them and pretended it was him. Makes no great difference, really. The important thing is these trade routes existed. They weren't the only ones, though. In Northern Europe, the Scandinavians, for a very long time, had been going across the sea. They sort of discovered and colonized Iceland, then Greenland, and were almost certainly the first Europeans to get to the North American continent. Although there is some evidence that the Basques had been going there. Who got there first? Not sure. The Basques certainly had been fishing off the coast of America, but they kept it quiet. There was, because business rivalry, I guess. If you know where there's loads and loads of cod, and you can make something out of it, you don't necessarily need to tell anybody else about it. So it's less written about the Vikings and Basques and their trade routes going in the other direction. And certainly, there is evidence that the Vikings got to North America 500 years before Christopher Columbus, who is credited with discovering America, even though there were already people there when he arrived, and he only got into what he called the West Indies. He didn't actually get to what we think of as America. Trade routes develop. There's this age of exploration where the sort of largely white Europeans are sort of going around the world and discovering places, ignoring the fact that people already live in there. So how can you discover? It's a bit like going into your next door neighbor's house and saying, "I've discovered your house." Anyway, beside the point, but that is again an example of the way it's seen from a Western European perspective. So what they used to do was they'd go to an island and plonk their own flag on it. Very similar thing happened 50 years ago when Americans went to the moon, stuck their American flag, claimed it as theirs. So what happened was conquest, colonization, the development of empires, the Spanish and the British especially, fought over the spoils of their conquests. Some people would suggest that the spoils of their conquests should be described as theft. Go to someone else's country, say, this is ours now, and so is the gold and various other bits and pieces of things that are in it. And, sort of Captain Cook and others arrived several hundred years ago in Australia. The local people are still discriminated against there. Right? I'm just pleased that there was nobody on the moon when the Americans arrived. Otherwise, we might have similar sort of battles now. Other European countries, Portugal, Germany, the Netherlands, start to rival the British, and they all go to Africa and take their various bits of Africa. The French take much of North Africa. Portuguese behave despicably in Central Africa and the Congo areas. The British and the Dutch Afrikaans people fought wars over who was going to mistreat the Africans and take their resources, particularly in South Africa, where up till the 1990s they had an apartheid system, a sort of multi-tiered system with the white people on the top. Okay, industrialization quickens this pace of exploration, discovery, largely driven by the desire for accumulation of wealth and economic growth. You can have a look at the good old trustworthy BBC on that one. And if you can look up Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations about the importance of capitalists and economies growing, that's important. But was this fair? Not really. Slavery is integral to this growth, this economic growth. There is more there. There's also on your Moodle page, there should be a link to David, the historian David Olusoga, sorry, apologies, David, saying that if you look at something basic like tea found in China, a long way away, so they moved that to India, used lots and lots of Indian people to grow the tea, went across the Atlantic to Brazil, found sugar, transplanted that to various parts of the Caribbean, took people from Africa to go there, to be the slaves, to grow this stuff. So something as ordinary as your cup of tea can also teach you the history of colonization, slavery, and globalization. How do they justify this kind of thing? Ooh, we're going around the world, we're taking what we want, basically. Well, first of all, there's religion. Let's go and spread the word of the Lord to these sort of people who don't know about Jesus, etc., etc. Right. And we will tell them what's what. There's also just quite straightforward racism. In America, they came up with the idea of manifest destiny. It's the white man's manifest destiny to rule the world. This justifies going to find all these people with reddish skin and saying, we'll have your land, we'll kill your buffaloes, we will sort of bring our agricultural sort of methods to the land that you used to sort of be nomads on, or you used to farm yourselves. And we're more important than you. Basically, it's our manifest destiny. So you can all go off to this dreadful piece of pointless, unfertile land, and you can try and live there. They called them reservations. Right. There's go back to slavery. Then slavery has always existed. Various people in sort of Asia, Europe, Africa enslaved each other. North America had sort of been enslaving their local bands, their local rivals, for a long time. But capitalism turned it into a trade. We'll go somewhere, we'll steal some people, kidnap some people, use any language you like besides recruit, take them somewhere else, sell them to somebody. despicable, basically, in my opinion, and hopefully in your opinion, turns that into a trade. There's the link at the bottom of that page there to David's sort of talk on how slavery was not just this bad thing that happened in the past, it was an integral part of building the British economy, and the same can be said for Spain, Portugal, and various other places. The American, Native American tribes, there's a bit of a history of them in Dee Brown's book there, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, always worth a look. Excuse me, next one. Traveling for work, I've called this. It's not new. It's nothing new about this. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire turned multicultural Europe and North Africa and parts of what we now call the Middle East into the Roman Empire, one big European market. There's lines, there's paths we could go down there on that one, but I'm not doing so at the moment. But yeah, these were people from Africa, from Asia, from sort of the Mediterranean, from Northern Europe, mixing quite well. When you see old movies about the Romans, they're all sort of white guys, but they weren't. Lots of evidence that Africans, the remains of Africans have been found in, for example, Vindolanda, a sort of archaeological site of an old Roman fort up in Cumbria, very close to Hadrian's Wall, so the far northern end of the empire. And so, you know, any idea that black people started coming into this country on this of a ship called the Windrush in the 1940s and 50s, somewhat out of date. And industrialization develops as well, which requires commodities and labor in specific places. People, for example, discover tin in Cornwall, sort of copper in North Wales, coal in various parts of mainly northern England and Scotland. People move to those areas because that's where the work and that's where the money becomes. Right? As industrialization develops and agricultural industrialization, there's more work in the towns and cities, in the factories and the mills than there is in on the land. So, you know, people move around. Economic migration, very topical thing at the moment. It's always been there. It's always been there. My own family, two grandparents came from the Republic of Ireland. Well, it was still part of Britain at the time, but they came from County Wexford on the south coast of Ireland to this country because this is where the work was. And they sort of, my other sort of father's family moved from Lancashire into Liverpool because there was work there connected with the railways. Right? So people have always moved around, some short distances, some from one country to another, blah blah blah. So that's been normal all along. Financial markets develop as well because we now have to have money with all this trade going on. You can't say, I've got 2 goats, I'm going to take them to China and swap them for some tea. That's just nonsense. We're going to go around various places and we're going to have some kind of currency. So, you know, I can sort of swap something for an IOU, basically. If you find a 5 or a tenner in your purse or your wallet or your pocket, have a look at it. It basically is an IOU. It says, Bank of England, I promise to pay £10 or whatever the appropriate amount is if you turn up with this scrap of paper. Right? So that was essential. Creation of money was essential to go along with trade, which meant the creation of financial centres, banking centres. London was an early one. Venice is another early one, and a very interesting one as well. Because at the time, Venice would be largely Catholic, as it probably still is now. Money lending that would send you to hell. It was such a terrible sin at the time in the Catholic and Church. Lend someone 10 quid and demand 11 quid back, charging 10% interest. That would get you excommunicated, therefore you would go to hell. It would be the common feeling at the time. So what they do? Oh, well, from a Catholic point of view, let's get the Jews to do it. They don't have this as a sin. And being Catholics, we think they're all going to hell anyway, so it makes no difference to them. This is so Jewish people were employed in banks. This is where we get this horrible idea about Jewish money lenders. Again, a very practical solution turns very rapidly into racism. And as it says there, migration is generally for economic reasons, whether you're going, when I was in my sort of early 20s in Liverpool in the 1980s, Lime Street Station would be packed on Sunday evening, Monday morning, with people going down south to work, and again on Friday when them coming back. People have always done this. Right? Very little work in Liverpool in the 1980s, if you didn't know about that. Right, this globalisation thing, was it fair? Well, no. There are people who say, talk about the glorious British Empire, the sun never set upon the British Empire. If you don't understand that, have a look at where the British Empire used to be, all over the globe, and the sun, therefore the sun never quite set on the whole thing. Right? Very patriotic, British stuff. But look at it. You go abroad, you exploit the local people, the local resources, take the wealth for yourself. Right? You actually employ some of the local people to be in charge of the poorer people and do the exploitation on your behalf. In some cases, very common. Sort of development across the British Empire. However, in the 60s, Andre Gunder Frank, a German sociologist, looked at development and underdevelopment and said that empires deliberately keep their colonies underdeveloped and keep them poor. This is very, very interesting. When you look at international aid, always comes with conditions. There's a link to the New Internationalist magazine there. Frequently, the wealthier Western or North American countries are saying, well, we do give aid to these poor countries. Lots of arguments about whether we should or not. Normally, it comes with conditions. Here's some money to build a dam. Then you've got to employ some of our companies to build that dam for you. So the money comes back. Right? Less sort of training for people in those countries than perhaps there could be. And have a look at the Industrial Revolution and British imperialism. There's plenty of books about this. Just one there I've given you at random that you can find on EBSCO by Ward. Rapidly moving to the 20th century. Right, communication. We've got telegraphy, the telegraph in the 19th century. Then we get the telephone, radio, TV. 1936 Olympics was the first to be broadcast on TV. Huge increase in the sale of TVs in this country, so that people could watch the coronation in 1953. My dad had just spent 15 years in the RAF, came out just before the coronation, and used some of his money to buy a TV, and told me the tales that somebody in each street seemed to get a television, and the whole street then would come around and watch the coronation on it. Apocryphal possibly, but it's a very, very common story. We also get space exploration and satellites, so pictures can be beamed up to satellites and then down. So we start to get the capability of broadcasting live across the world. And in the late 1960s, there was an Our World TV show, which is broadcast simultaneously across Europe, across certainly North America, across to Australia. The image there you can see is the Beatles, a very popular group at the time, singing their song "All You Need Is Love" to the world. So there's been a very rapid development since then because of satellites. TV goes global. We then get sort of cell phones, mobile phones, different names for them in different parts of the world, also using sort of satellite technology. And we get the development of video. So not only can you watch television, record it and watch it later. You know, set it to record, go to the pub, come back, watch your program. And that is overtaken by DVDs, which is overtaken by streaming. And classic. Virtually everybody seems to have access to Netflix these days. There'll be more about streaming in a week or two. Also wanted to see how entertainment plays a really big part in this globalization. At those early market fairs and market towns and market days, there was quite often traveling troubadours, traveling shows. As the towns and cities develop, plays, music, theatre, music hall, cinema later comes along. And radio. In this country, we got the BBC, British Broadcasting Company, it was at the time, with Lord Reith in charge, you know, with this mission to entertain and educate. And very, very much from a establishment point of view and perspective. Right. And just think about the screen, the screen in front of you now, or if you've got it, if it's a screen on a TV or whatever device you've got a screen on, much of it is driven by entertainment. And, you know, people, you can look at some of those things in the past. Oh, people used to live in these houses without radio and without television. What did they do? Right. You'll see some old people saying, we made our own entertainment in those days. Right, we already mentioned that the Olympics and the coronation. It's the coronation of Queen Elizabeth in 1953, not Coronation Street, although very, very similar issues. Ethnography as well. People turn to go around the world, right? And they take their culture with them. Right, the establishments, the colonial powers, etc., try to impose their language, their customs, their political structures. India, for example, has a parliament very much based on the UK parliament. Two of the most common languages in the world, English and Spanish. Because they would go around the world and say, stop speaking your own language. Everything important has to be done in our language. And it's not just the English as well. You know, when the French or the Normans invaded in 1066, they made the speaking of the form of English language that there was then. They made that illegal, and all important documents had to be in French. So, you know, they've all done this. They've all done this. So there's power and has to be considered, but people will take their cultural things with them. Got a sort of, again, edited highlights of music. Africans take sort of their traditions of stringed and percussion instruments with them. They're taken as slaves, but they've still got their own language and customs which they try and keep hold of. You can mix this with European strings and with horns. And then you create jazz, blues, rock and roll, eventually pop music. Other things about cultural imperialism and ethnography there. You can go to Africa and see lots of people, like guys wearing a Chelsea football shirt. The other thing about it as well is, remember, you should have come across the concept of hegemony, mainstream culture. Right? Mainstream culture tells us that generally, Jesus was a white guy. I've never actually heard anyone say he was a white guy, but I've seen lots of movies and lots of pictures, lots of little statues with a guy on a cross, generally a white guy. And Madonna there in one of the photographs, in A Song Like a Prayer, the video for A Song Like a Prayer, Jesus was a black man and caused lots of controversy. But when you think he was from the Middle East, be a bit weird if that Mary gave birth to a baby that looked like a Northern European white kid. Chances of Jesus being white, very, very slim indeed. Yes, he's portrayed like that. And that is what cultural imperialism does to us. I had a friend who was in Syria many years ago, was recruited to be in a film about the life of Jesus Christ. Asked to go to this one place, went there. Basically, they'd scooped up all the white people in the towns around, all the white tourists and everything to be the extras in this movie. And it's about a guy born, brought up and lived apparently all or most of his life in and around what we now call Palestine and Israel. Okay, moving on. Arts, travel and spare time, creates tourism, exploration for fun. Entertainment is part of that tourism. As I said, people will take their cultures and everything with them. So travel and tourism means that a lot more people go to Glastonbury from around the world. People go from the UK to Coachella, to Roskilde, to the Festival of the Desert in Mali. And then cultures come here. This is just in the northwest of England. There's a lot more than this, but in the northwest of England, there's the Africa Oi Festival, and a lot of other Africa-related festivals, Irish festivals, jazz festivals, Jewish jazz festivals, the Mexican Day of the Dead celebrations, and plenty of international football, obviously, Asian Nalas. We celebrate Christmas, Easter, Passover, Ramadan, Eid, Diwali, First Footing, Pesach, and much more. And there are images there from Liverpool's Africa Oi, and the bottom two pictures are from the Preston Caribbean Carnival. People in the Caribbean community in Preston do like to remind everyone that that is older than Notting Hill, as I believe is Leeds. Right, so finish off. An exercise I want you to do to look at this globalization thing. Wherever you're living, just have a look around, have a good look around, and identify how many countries things have come from. How much of your clothing is made in China or some other part of the world? And is your device made in Korea or in China? Your handheld mobile phone thingy. So just make a note of how many countries are represented just by things lying around in your house and on the shelves, in your larder, in your fridge, and what have you. Look at your music collection. How many nations are represented there? Compare the two. Is your cultural life as diverse as your clothing and your food, etc.? And if not, why not? Why don't you go and explore the music of various other parts of the world? And why not? So you should. So that is a very, very quick overview of globalization. Misses an awful lot of things out, obviously, but hopefully it's introduced you to some ideas. Okay, thanks. Bye.